Hello, my dear viewers. I'm Olga Demchuk, a researcher of the inner world of personality. Today, I'd like to talk a little about subtle inner perception, the way we sense things before they become clear. Why is it so difficult for us to understand the chain of events that unfolds as a result of our actions? It seems that we have enough intellect to later analyze and see that obviously things could only have happened this way and no other. But in the moment of looking ahead and planning, it's as if we saw a completely different scenario unfolding. When we gaze thoughtfully into the future and really truly want to see exactly what it will be like, we need to deeply connect with our real selves. That is, to truly see and recognize your true self. Your real self as a participant in real, actual events and situations, as a direct participant. And it is precisely at this point that all the problems arise. When a person tries to imagine the future, they often fall into one of two extremes. Either everything will be wonderful, people even say, everything will be fine, everything will be great, don't worry. Or on the other hand, everything will be terrible. This polarity is directly connected to our ideal self. I am either good or bad. That is, we think we are looking at future events, but in reality, we are looking at how it will be for us. We try to carefully monitor and observe our emotional state, in other words, our personal feelings and emotions, rather than focusing on the actual events themselves. And that's why quite often we end up unintentionally distorting the facts. Our emotions can prevent us from seeing and understanding what will happen with a truly clear and objective perspective, and of course from seeing the other participants in these events. When we see people as mere dolls, or as pawns in a game, or as predictable mechanical robots, we are unable to truly and accurately predict their behavior as their own. By arranging these figures and trying to look into the space of future events, we are actually dealing with ourselves. That is, we think we are considering another person, but in reality it is always ourselves everywhere. How would I act? This is usually how people analyze what they hear. And how would I act? Then what do I think? In other words, there is no real way to imagine someone else as truly different, as completely unlike oneself. And this closed-off, self-centered focus makes a person blind. And then he takes certain actions, and the consequences turn out to be completely different from what he expected. When we try to find our orientation in what is ahead, we need to compare it with where we actually are, and to come back to our real size, to who we are in truth. At that moment, a person loses their power over space, the power they possess when they are fantasizing about events. After all, in my fantasies, I can unfold the story however I want. Even a terrible story is still a story where I am the main character, me, and once again, me. It's as if the play is always being performed around a single person. It's not a narrative about everything. It's always a narrative about me. And it is this smallness that is unbearable for us. Our true size, the understanding of the finiteness of life, the realization of our lack of omnipotence, in other words, looking at the future with clear eyes, is essentially looking directly at our own reflection in the mirror. When you look and you are able to perceive it calmly, objectively, and matter-of-factly. Today, I would like to discuss with you a few examples of those consequences that are particularly difficult for us to anticipate or predict. The tendency to avoid taking responsibility significantly impoverishes one's personality. Let me explain what I mean by this. Modern psychology often uses expressions like these. For example, someone might say, "It's because I had such parents," when trying to explain their own feelings or actions, or "It's because I have this or that diagnosis, or perhaps borderline personality disorder, or maybe even something else," or "It's because I have this particular part of myself, or this specific aspect." Some people even say, it's because my mind was clouded and obscured by perhaps some demons or the evil eye or a family curse. When we thoughtfully and carefully formulate reasons in this particular way, these causes are already being placed outside of ourselves. On the one hand, I remain entirely blameless because it is not my fault. But on the other hand, I also give up the ability to influence it, to make any difference at all. It's some part of me, but not really me. It's my parents, but not me. It's an aspect of mine, but not me. It's my diagnosis, but not me. In other words, the part of us that is real and alive stays out of sight, and instead a kind of constructed figure steps forward. A version that explains everything through borrowed ideas and outside references, rather than from inner experience. Here I have my parents, here is a part of me, here is my aspect, this is my evil eye, this is because I am in this country, this is because of the situation. I resemble a child surrounded by toys. The bunny is responsible for this, the teddy bear for that, the doll for something else, and the toy car for another thing. But it's as if I remain unexplored, not having truly claimed myself. What are the consequences? The person does not change. A person can watch endless videos, attend courses, participate in projects, but the essence remains the same. It's as if there are even more little toys piling up. And that's why people say, oh my God, now this too, yet another complication. So I already had 10 bunnies, dolls, teddy bears, and kittens, and now it feels like I have 20. In other words, this complication doesn't come from a strengthening of awareness, from the ability to analyze and synthesize, but rather to remember some kind of explanatory construct which, once I add it to my explanations, suddenly makes everything seem logical. I used to think it was illogical, that something was wrong when I yelled at people, but it turns out I have borderline personality disorder. Ah, well, now it makes sense why I yell. So you see, it's as if I have a logical chain, and for it to make sense, I was missing a link. And then, my grandmother was like that too. Well, once we add my grandmother, then everything makes sense. Then everything can stay as it is. We've found an explanation. People even say, I want to understand. But this understanding is really about blaming. So if we don't take ownership, we don't control it, we disown it. And then on the one hand, the person appears blameless, but on the other hand, nothing depends on them. The second point is the habit of fighting. People often don't notice it, but this combative attitude toward reality is our default state. That is, when we come into this world, we are in conflict with this space. It is never quite the way we want it to be. It is very rarely the way I want it to be. If I'm not aware of my own aggressiveness, there will be a lot of angry and bad people around me. In other words, I will constantly disown and project my own aggression. If I make the world dangerous, I am filled with fear, and then it feels as if I am either paralyzed or half alive and puppet-like, or aggressive and forceful. In other words, the consequence of not owning my own aggression, my own combative nature, is that it prevents cooperation because you are always on edge, always paranoid. The third point is the habit of devaluing. The ripple effects of devaluing are much more serious. The consequences are much more serious than we might think, and it is this seriousness that we cannot bear. This act of projecting negativity, of being combative, has very serious consequences. They affect the entire future, and it is unbearable for us to realize this. A person feels that they need to control themselves even more. However, in reality, when a person undergoes a transformation toward greater humanity, control is no longer necessary. So let's return to the topic, the habit of devaluing. The simplest way is to find a mistake, to spot a flaw, to notice an inaccuracy, to point out an illogical detail. I remember when I held a webinar on self-reflection last Saturday, and people were looking for mistakes. They say, we counted the circles and there aren't 12 circles here. In other words, while I'm trying to present the bigger picture, They're focused on searching, looking for where the mistake is, where the mistake is, where the mistake is. And this constant search for mistakes locks away a person's potential. So the consequence of this is that I get a brief sense of self-affirmation for 3 seconds. I find some kind of inaccuracy, but because of that, I end up attacking myself. In other words, I close off my potential. I can't learn. I can't see the beauty. My attention is always focused on finding flaws. And the ripples from this will affect not only myself, but also other people. Such a person, as young people say, comes across as sketchy. That is, when you're around them, you constantly feel judged, as if they're just tolerating you, and you sense that they only notice the bad things about you. Another point is the lack of connection with time. At the very beginning, we talked about the real self and how important it is to look at yourself in the mirror in a matter-of-fact way. When a person is unable to stay in touch with time, they can't plan or assess their own capabilities. As a result, they end up taking on a lot of commitments, making promises, or when planning their actions in the process of pursuing what they want, due to this lack of connection with time, they can end up losing everything, as if it all slips away. That is, for example, making a promise and being sure that I will do it at a certain time. But then I lose touch with time, drift off into fantasy, get caught up in other events, and forget. And then, of course, other people will perceive this as ignoring them, as if they are unimportant. Or I take on work that is beyond my capacity. This too is about a lack of connection with time. The task is manageable in theory, but it is unmanageable within the time frame I have allotted for it. And this misunderstanding of how much time is needed can foster a sense of inadequacy in a person. A person may seem much worse to themselves than they really are, when in fact they simply need more time. I observe during sessions that when you discuss a person's problems with them, for example, their tendency to drift into fantasy, I can see how tense they become. I tell them, there's no need to fix this right now or even tomorrow. That is, they realize that this is getting in their way, and it's as if their mind immediately starts searching for solutions to these issues either now or at the latest tomorrow. So you see, this lack of giving oneself time creates excessive internal pressure within the person. All these moments, well, I could easily spend another 3 hours talking about the consequences. But I'll mention one more and then pause. It's about the inability to be empathetic. When a person is locked inside themselves, when they are too focused on their wounded ego, they have no understanding of what it's like for someone else. Remember, at the beginning we talked about how I seem to arrange these toy soldiers, planning strategically, but all the soldiers have my face. There are no other people there. And this self-enclosure does not allow for the otherness of another person. And so you keep blurting things out. You keep saying things that end up hurting you. In other words, you don't see people, but people are a source of support. You rely on others to be able to do more, to cooperate, to exchange something. And this inability to cooperate creates a prospect of stagnation. Even if a person accumulates some material wealth, they realize that they are still in the same place. Only other people can truly bring something unique and different, a different worldview. That is, with my own worldview, I will process everything and keep getting the same result. To shift this inner model, we often need to be near someone who relates differently, and to allow their way of being to touch us. Then the change spreads gradually, like ripples on water. It happens on its own. And a person who does not want to foresee this is actually stealing from themselves, stealing their own happiness, stealing their own future. And when we talk about clairvoyance, it is precisely about the moment when we do not distort the information we can perceive with our subjectivity, with our limited mind. When you look at a person and you are not preoccupied with how they feel about you, how they look at you, or what they think of you, when you stop thinking about all of that, you gain a clear vision of this person. In the same way, clear vision of future events is not about catastrophes or about perfect happiness, where each character has a different face. That is the moment when you begin to see more clearly, not through tension or effort, but through a quiet, stable presence. Undoubtedly, clear seeing requires intelligence. You need an understanding of what is happening in order to name it, to symbolize it in words. Because words create these pre-representatives of meaning, and then we can rearrange, understand, and draw general conclusions. But first of all, some people are clairvoyant, but not very intelligent. They cannot distort the information they receive. With this, I will wrap up the video. Thank you to everyone who likes and comments on my videos. Our team and I are sincerely grateful. As always, I remind you to subscribe to the channel. Join our discoveries. And I remind you that you can order one of my books in English, an ebook. This book is a guide to the inner world of the individual, knowledge accompanied real-life examples. This channel is just at the beginning of its development. More in-depth material will appear here gradually. If the themes we explore resonate with you, you're welcome to stay and continue this journey with us. New projects and formats will appear in time, and you will learn about them here. Take care. See you next time.